Hi everyone again. We are joining our story for the Marten's class story, which is The Mystery of the Hidden Gold. We're on chapter 8, Trouble in Planet Adventure. Scott and Jack grabbed their bikes from the garden shed and pedalled off down Church Lane as if they were in contention for the yellow jersey in the Tour de France. They skidded to a halt on the seafront and ducked down behind the harbour wall. The Castle Key cabin next door to Dottie's tea rooms was a classic seaside shop, bedecked with rainbow-coloured buckets and spades and flip-flops and beach towels. They also hired out pedal boats and bikes. To Scott's relief, the Hartleys were still there, picking out bikes from the racks along the front of the shop. "We'll take 2 tandems," Mr. Hartley was saying. Tall, with faded red hair and beard, he was knitted out as if the 3-mile bike ride to Krakikstow was a solo crossing of the Sahara Desert. Hiking boots, those zip ones, techno shorts, where even the pockets have pockets, and a backpack bristling with survival gadgets. The twins were identical, with angelic blonde curls and matching scowls on their chubby round faces. "No way," the one with the SpongeBob SquarePants t-shirt howls. "I'm not getting on a stupid tandem. That's final, final, final." Their dad shook his head. "You two can't ride on the road by yourselves. One of you can go with Mum and one with me." "You can't make us," the other twin, who was in full Spider-Man costume, kicked his dad's shin. "I want this one." He tried to climb onto an adult's mountain bike. Now, Poppet," Mrs. Hartley sighed. "If you're good boys, Mummy will buy you some sweeties to eat on the way." SpongeBob stuck out his bottom lip. "It better be a jumbo pack." Spider-Man dropped a mountain bike. "Yeah, and a cornetto." Behind the wall, Jack shook his head in disbelief. "We were never that revolting, were we?" he whispered. "They make horrid Henry look like an angel." Scott grinned. "You were worse. In fact, why am I saying were? You still are." At last, the Hartley expedition was wobbling north on the roads towards the narrow causeway that connected Castle Key Island to the mainland. Scott and Jack followed at a discreet distance. It wasn't difficult to keep up, especially as Jack's replacement wheel had now been installed on his BMX bike, and he was no longer saddled with the Iron Age spare bike he had to use to ride to Pendragon Manor during Operation Lost Star. SpongeBob and Spider-Man entertained themselves by throwing toffees at pedestrians and trying to unseat each other from their bikes as if they were in a medieval jousting tournament. And of course, neither of them pedalled, except when their parents turned round to check on them. Progress was not exactly supersonic. When they finally arrived at Planet Adventure over an hour later, Jack was hot, fed up, and faint with hunger. There had barely been time to throw on shorts and t-shirts, let alone eat breakfast or make a packed lunch when they left Stone Cottage. But once they were in the queue to buy their entrance tickets, he began to perk up. The intoxicating theme park soundtrack of screams and clatters and snatches of high-voltage music filled his ears, and the scents of hot dogs and candy floss wafted into his nostrils. He rubbed his hands together. "Let's get pizza and then go straight to the obliterator." Scott put his hands up. "Whoa! We're here on an undercover surveillance mission, remember? We've got to stick with that lot and find out whether they've nicked our map." He tipped his head towards the Hartley family, who were queuing 2 booths away. SpongeBob and Spider-Man were rolling around on the floor, wrestling over a balloon they pinched from a toddler's buggy. Jack groaned. "But they'll have to go on all the baby rides, and it's not like they're rushing off to dig up the gold while we're here, is it?" "But they might say something about it," Scott explained. "If the parents took the map, they'll be making plans. If it's the kids, they'll be squabbling over who gets the biggest share of the gold. So just keep your ears open and snoop like crazy. Imagine you're Mrs. Loveday." Jack grimaced. "Now that," he said, "is above and beyond the call of duty." Luckily, the family's first stop was to the donut stand, so Jack and Scott were able to stave off immediate starvation. But after that, things went rapidly downhill. The Hartleys went on Mini Cart Mania, the Woodland Choo Choo, and the Little Rascals Pirate Ride. The boys trudged round after them. Scott had to agree with Jack. It was sheer torture. While they were trundling along the rides with mild thrills, they could hear the delicious screams of the unbridled terror from the obliterator. Passengers staggered off, wobbly-kneed, green-faced and giggling. It was no consolation that the twins felt the same way. "Why won't you let us go on the obliterator?" Spider-Man whined for the 1000th time. "It's not fair." Their dad sighed. "Because you're too small." SpongeBob stood on tiptoes. "No, we're not. Ben's dad at school lets him go on the obliterator all the time. You're mean." Suddenly Scott had a brainwave. "Let's take it in turns. One of us stick with the terrible twosome and the other one can go on the obliterator. Then we can swap." Jack stared at Scott, filled with the tidal wave of pure adoration for his big brother. If they hadn't been in full view of the carousel, he could have almost hugged him. "I'll go first," he said, sprinting off to join the queue. Scott turned back to the Hartleys. They were having yet another fight about where they were going to go next. Dad consulted the map of Planet Adventure. "Next stop, Pet's Corner. Let's see, that's at F6. This way." Spider-Man snatched the map. "But I want to go to the House of Horrors." Now that, Scott thought, would be the perfect place for those two. Mrs. Hartley pressed her palms on her temples. "You're far too young for the House of Horrors, Poppet." Scott looked down at his copy of the map. It was divided into a grid marked with letters along the bottom and numbers along the side. F6, Scott repeated to himself. That's just like the code on the treasure map. So maybe F6 and the other pairs on Maddox's map are the coordinates. And that didn't make sense. Maddox hadn't divided his map into grids. Suddenly Scott realised that the Hartleys were on the move. He spotted them in the crowd and hurried after them. He was starting to think this was a huge waste of time. Neither the parents nor the twins had said anything remotely connected with maps, gold, or treasure islands. He was considering giving up and heading for the obliterator when he noticed SpongeBob and Spider-Man peeling off from behind their parents. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley carried on walking, unaware that their little darlings had given them a slip. For a moment Scott was paralysed with their indecision. Should he run after the parents and tell them, or should he follow the twins and see what they were up to? If only he hadn't let Jack go off on his own. He caught sight of a flash of red and blue Spider-Man outfit ducking under a barrier and made up his mind. The twins were heading straight into the House of Horrors. Scott elbowed through the queue and vaulted over the barrier after them. It was dark inside. A flash of sickly green light suddenly lit up an enormous Grim Reaper in a flowing black cloak. Jack saw the silhouette of the two boys standing on the safety rails round the high viewing platform. They were shoving each other and arguing, as usual. "Call this scary?" SpongeBob grumbled. "It's pathetic." Scott ran up the steps and looked down over the railing. There was a dizzying drop to the floor below, where a terrified-looking dummy was being attacked by a horde of axe-wielding zombies. "Get out of my way, Dorkbrain!" Spider-Man yelled at his brother. Then he clambered onto the top rail and tried to grab the Grim Reaper's scythe as it swung past. Scott had to do something, even if it meant blowing his cover. "Come down from there, you fool!" he shouted. Spider-Man turned and stuck his tongue out. "Oh yeah? You gonna make me?" He lunged for the Grim Reaper. There was a squeak of trainer on metal, and he slipped and pitched over the rail. There were screams from people standing nearby and those looking up from below. But somehow Spider-Man had got hold of a handful of the Reaper's black cloak. He was now dangling by one arm, with nothing beneath him but a long, long drop onto zombie axes. There was a ripping sound as the cloak began to give way. Scott leapt over the rail. Hanging on with one hand, he reached out and grabbed Spider-Man's t-shirt. With a superhuman surge of strength, he swung Spider-Man back over the rail onto the platform. and only just managed to stop himself losing balance and skydiving into the zombie display. It took Scott some time to find his way out of the House of Horrors and reunite Spider-Man with his parents. When he finally emerged into daylight, he was dazzled by camera flashes. News of his heroic exploits had clearly spread fast. A jostling crowd mobbed him like seagulls swooping on an abandoned sandwich. A reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "How does it feel to have heroically rescued a child from the jaws of death?" he demanded. "Can you give us a comment for Radio Cornwall?" Scott felt an arm around his shoulder. Jack was grinning at him. "So this is your idea of undercover surveillance operation? You've got a lot to learn, mate." Scott laughed. For once, his brother had a point. "The Obliterator was awesome, by the way," Jack added. Join us next time for Chapter 9. Emily Wilde is in the building. Take care.